10 years later, I was sitting across from the senior partner of one of the most respected architecture firms in Chicago, signing a contract worth more than my parents had ever earned. Combined, I thought about calling them. I didn't. When I was 22, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 quiet dinners, and told me he was pulling my college funding, not because the money was gone, because my brother needed it more. He's going into civil engineering, my father said. Like that explained everything. That's a real career. You're doing interior design. You can learn that from YouTube. My mother didn't look up from washing the dishes. I sat there for a long moment. I remember the sound of the faucet running. I remember the linoleum floor had a small crack near the refrigerator that nobody had ever bothered to fix. I looked at that crack and thought, okay, if that's how it is. What about my scholarship applications? I asked. I'd already been working on 3 of them. Those take time, my father said. Your brother's program starts in the fall. The money needs to go now. I nodded once. I got up from the table. I went to my room and I sat on my bed in the dark for a long time, doing the math in my head, figuring out what comes next when the floor drops out. What came next was 2 jobs, a waitressing shift, 6 nights a week at a diner on Route 9, and a Saturday morning position cleaning offices in a medical building downtown. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I wrote 43 essays in 14 months. I won 4 of them. The rest of my program I funded through loans I'm still paying off, though not for much longer. I didn't go home much during those years. There wasn't time, and honestly, there wasn't much pull. When I did visit, my father would ask my brother about his coursework, his internship, his plans. He'd ask me if I was still doing the art thing. I'd say yes. He'd nod in that way that meant he'd already moved on in his head. My brother was good about it, mostly. He didn't rub it in, he just accepted it, the way you accept a gift without questioning whether you deserved it. That was its own kind of thing to swallow. I graduated with honors. Nobody from my family came to the ceremony. My father said they couldn't get the time off work. My mother said she'd take me to dinner to celebrate, and she did. The Applebee's on the highway near their house, which I drove 40 minutes to reach. She gave me a card with a $20 bill inside. She seemed genuinely proud. She just didn't know how to fight for things, my mother. Never had. I moved to Chicago 3 months after graduation. I got an entry-level position at a small residential firm. The kind of place where you spend 2 years making coffee and drafting other people's ideas. I stayed for 2.5, learning everything I could before moving to a mid-sized firm with a better reputation and a project manager who actually mentored me. I worked harder than anyone in that office. I know that's what everyone says, but I have the timesheets to prove it. I regularly logged 60-hour weeks. I took on projects that fell through the cracks. I solved problems before they became problems. I did not do this to prove anything to my father. I did it because I had found the thing I was made for, and I was not going to waste it. By the time I was 31, I had 2 regional design awards, a project featured in Architectural Digest's Emerging Voices issue, and a reputation in the Chicago commercial and hospitality space that had taken me nearly a decade to build quietly and carefully. I had not spoken to my father about work in years. Our calls were short. He'd ask if I was staying warm. I'd ask if his knee was better. We'd agree to talk soon and then not talk for another 2 months. It was my mother who called me about my brother's engagement. He proposed to a girl named Shelby, she said. Actually, no, I should not use that name. Let me say it the way I said it to myself when I heard. My brother was engaged. He'd been seeing someone for about 8 months, which my mother told me, with the slightly breathless energy she reserved for things, she found exciting and a little unexpected. They're having an engagement party at the Whitmore House. You know, that event venue off the lake. I did know it. I had actually submitted a proposal to redesign their interior event spaces 2 years prior. They had gone with someone else. Walking back in there would have its own particular flavor. Your father wants you to come, my mother said. He wants the whole family together. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. I almost said no. I had a reason that would have been easy to use. A project deadline, a client call, something. But something made me say yes. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was tired of having a wound I kept picking at from a distance. Maybe I just wanted to see my brother happy and let that mean something simple for once. I drove down on a Saturday evening in early November. The venue had strung lights along the lakeside terrace, and the parking lot was full. I wore a dark green wrap dress and my good coat, and I told myself on the drive down that I was going to be fine, that I was an adult, that I did not need anything from these people. My father was near the entrance talking to one of my uncles when I walked in. He saw me, nodded, and went back to his conversation. No hug. No, I'm glad you came. Just a nod, the same one I'd gotten at the kitchen table 9 years ago. I found my brother near the bar. He looked genuinely happy, which was good to see. He hugged me and introduced me to his fiancée's family, and that was when things got complicated in a way I had not anticipated. Her family. Her father extended his hand and said his daughter had talked about me. I looked at him. I said I wasn't sure we'd met. He said we hadn't, but that his daughter had mentioned my name when she described the firm she was working with. And that was the moment I understood. My brother's fiancée. This woman he'd been with for 8 months. This woman my father was about to introduce to a room full of people as the best thing to happen to his son, was the client. The lead on the Harrington Hotel renovation that my firm had been managing for the past 4 months. I had sat across from her in 3 separate planning meetings. I had presented mood boards to her. I had negotiated fixture budgets with her. She came around from the other side of the bar and stopped when she saw me. "Oh," she said. "Hi," I said. Her name was something with a soft sound, the kind of name that fits neatly into a formal introduction. She was poised and clearly smart, and she had excellent taste in lighting fixtures, which I had observed professionally. She looked from me to my brother and back again and said, quietly, "You didn't tell me your sister was." "An architect," my brother said, like he was completing a sentence he'd started many times. "Yeah." There was a beat where all 4 of us understood that something had just shifted, though we didn't yet know into what shape. The party went on. People found their seats. There was a cocktail hour, then a move to the main room for dinner. My father was at the center of the table with my mother and my brother and my soon-to-be sister-in-law and her parents. I was at the end, beside my uncle and his wife, which was fine. I liked my uncle's wife. She asked about my work and actually listened to the answer. Then my father stood up. He tapped his glass, and the room settled, and he began to speak in that particular voice he used when he wanted to sound important. A little formal, a little larger than he usually was. He talked about my brother. He talked about how hard my brother had worked. He talked about the sacrifices the family had made to support him. He said, and I will remember this sentence for the rest of my life. We always believe that if you invest in the right child, you get to see that investment pay off. The right child. I looked at my wine glass. My uncle's wife put her hand briefly on my arm. My father kept going. He talked about how proud he was to see his son building a future, building a life, finding a partner. He said his son was the proof that when you believe in someone, they rise to meet it. He did not mention me. Not once, not in passing, not as a footnote. I was sitting 12 feet away, and I was not in the room as far as his speech was concerned. When he sat down, there was applause. My brother looked briefly uncomfortable. He glanced at me and then away. My soon-to-be sister-in-law looked at me directly. Her expression was careful and unreadable, the same face she wore in client meetings when something wasn't going the way she'd expected. Dinner was served. I ate. I talked to my uncle about his garden, which I genuinely find interesting. I ordered a second glass of wine. I was not going to make a scene. That was never going to be my move. I had spent my whole adult life being the person who did the work quietly and let the results speak. And I was not about to change that in a banquet room with a centerpiece made of autumn branches. After dinner, while people were moving around for dessert and coffee, my soon-to-be sister-in-law found me near the windows. I owe you an apology, she said, which was not what I expected. I said she didn't owe me anything. She said, I didn't know you and my fiancé were related until about 4 days ago. He mentioned his sister was in architecture and I put it together. I should have said something then, I'm sorry. I told her it was genuinely fine, that there was no conflict professionally, that I'd handled more complicated client situations. She was quiet for a moment. She was looking out at the lake. Then she said, Your father's speech. I said I wasn't going to talk about that, she said. I've seen your project portfolio. I've seen what you've built. We chose your firm specifically because of the Meridian Lofts project and the way you handled the acoustic problems in the Castillo Gallery renovation. Your work has a quality of listening to it, like the space knows what it's supposed to feel like. I looked at her. She said, I don't know what happened in your family. That's not my business. But I wanted you to know that I know what I'm looking at. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked out at the lake too. The lights from the terrace were making small gold reflections on the water. Thank you, I said, and I meant it as plainly as I said it. My brother found us a few minutes later. He could tell something had passed between us, and he had the grace to look uncertain about it. He asked me if I was okay. I told him I was. He said he was sorry about Dad's speech. I told him our father had always been consistent at least, and that made him flinch a little, which wasn't my intention exactly, but wasn't unwelcome either. My father found me near the coat rack at the end of the evening. He said, Good to see you made it. I said, Congratulations on the engagement. She seems like a good person. He nodded. Then he said, with the tone of someone offering a gift they think is overdue, You know, your brother could probably get you some work through his contacts. Now that you're in the same city. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, I have work, Dad. He said, I just mean it's always good to have connections. I said, I've built my own. He seemed to want to say something else and then didn't. My mother appeared beside him and hugged me and said she was glad I came and that I looked beautiful and asked if I was eating enough, which is its own form of love, even if it's the only form she knows how to deliver. I drove home that night on the highway with the windows up and the radio off. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was something quieter than either of those things. Something that felt like the last piece of a math problem finally balancing. Like I had spent a decade building a proof, and the proof was complete. And all it had taken was my father telling a roomful of people that he'd invested in the right child. He had. He just hadn't invested in me. I had invested in myself. Every shift at that diner, every scholarship essay at midnight, every 60-hour week, every project I took on when I was exhausted and doubted and undercredited, every room I designed that I put something true into. 3 weeks after the party, my soon-to-be sister-in-law sent an email to my project manager, saying she wanted me specifically on the lead design team for the second phase of the hotel project. She cited my vision for the lobby atrium and my communication with her team throughout the process. My project manager forwarded it to me with a note that said, Nice work. My brother texted me that same week. He said he'd heard through his fiancée that things were going well with the project. He said he was proud of me. He said he'd always known. I didn't answer that last part. I just said thanks, that she was easy to work with, and that I was glad they were happy. I meant both of those things. I still think about my father's speech sometimes, not with the same weight as I used to, more like you'd examine an old scar, noting its shape, remembering what made it, but not feeling the original pain of it anymore. He was telling a story he decided on a long time ago, and I wasn't in it. That's not something I could have fixed by being better or working harder or winning more awards. The story was already written. He just kept telling it. The contract I signed that fall was for the interior design and spatial planning of a 12-story mixed-use development in the River North neighborhood. My name is on the project documentation. My choices are in the bones of that building. I don't need him to know that. But sometimes, very quietly, it is enough that it is true.